אני הכרתי את דורין לפני כמה חודשים במהלך עבודה משותפת שעשינו ביחד. היא יושבת בוושינגטון, באחד המשרדים הגדולים בוושינגטון שמתעסקים בסחר בינלאומי. היא בפירמה שנקראת בלעדיים, שזה תחום ההתמחות שלהם. מתעסקת בסיוע ובייעוץ לגופים ולחברות שרוצים לחדור לשוק האמריקאי. מתעסקת בנושאים של ייצוא ויבוא לשוק האמריקאי, הסכמי הפצה, הסכמי רישיון, הסכמים גלובליים, מייעצת גם לממשלות. אז אולי במקום לתת את כל ההקדמה הארוכה הזאת, אני פשוט אזמין אותה לכאן והיא תיתן את ההרצאה. Please, Doreen.
Laila Tov. I'm sorry I'm speaking English. I apologize. I wish I could do it in Hebrew, but I'll probably have enough trouble in English. If you did not get a brochure and you want one, if you came in early and have been sitting in here a while, they're out front. I have a lot I can talk about and not a lot of time, so I'm going to try and focus on what I think you care about most, which is the business climate in the United States right now. I work at a big law firm, but we're Southeast regionally based, just so you get my firm perspective. We've got Memphis and Nashville and New Orleans. There's a lot of venture capital money in the Southeast. So you hear on the media that nothing's happening in the U.S., but actually there's a lot happening, and there's a lot more waiting to happen. Our Washington office has a lot of policy people. I have people that have come out of the White House, or they've worked up on the Hill in the Appropriations Committee, and they help companies find money. And there's lots of different ways to find money. One way is you write it right in the legislation, and as you all know, we've had a lot of legislation recently giving money out that's supposed to stimulate jobs and business and growth. This isn't a lecture on whether that's working or isn't working, but there is money and there are ways to get money, and that is trickling down through the economy, not fast enough, and there's not enough of it. It's not really reaching small businesses. It's not we really haven't done a good job in getting to the startups or the emerging markets. But there are several things that are happening. We'll talk about those in a second. But with the election coming up, I wanted to just take a second and tell you my perspective. We've just been sitting around and waiting for this election. We are delighted that this election is happening, and we see we're getting this 24/7, and granted, I'm in D.C., I am what's inside the Beltway, so my perspective may not be what you read and see in the paper, but every moment we're doing a count. The Republicans are going to take the House. It's neck and neck in the Senate. I haven't been home now for a week, so I can't tell you what's happened minute by minute in the last week, but I think it's going to be real close to a shift. We're going to go to a Republican Congress. We go to a Republican Congress, we're going to create gridlock. It's going to be wonderful. You've got the whole Obama administration, which came in on this wave of we're going to help the people, we're going to change everything, and America was swept up in this wave, and you can say that we are, I don't know, all blinded by the light, or blinded by stupidity, or blinded by hope, or whatever you think, but the wave came in and washed over everybody. And where's the change? So you're going to see a reverse, and what's going to happen in Washington is you're not going to see a lot getting done, which from a business perspective is a good thing, because we don't want more money going out, we don't want the deficit going up, we don't want higher business taxes, we don't want an extension of, we have this now alternative minimum tax. So tax is going to factor into businesses coming in, and some of the things I'm going to talk about how to set up an entity. I think everything is tax driven. I mean, yes, you need other things, but the bottom line is tax driven. And trade, our economy is floundering. And you all may know this, but I have to tell you just in case you don't, because I think it's amazing. Two-way trade between the United States and Israel. You're a small little country. We're a huge, giant country. Do you know that you export double the amount to the United States that the United States exports here. Did everybody know that? I mean, I just think that's absolutely amazing, and I guarantee you no one in America has any idea of that. That's one point I wanted to mention, and the other one is 25 years ago on October 19th, if you're not living and breathing in trade, you probably don't know that it's now been 25 years that the free trade agreement has been in place. And the U.S.-Israeli free trade agreement is unique in the United States for a bunch of reasons. One, because it's so old, but two, because no one else is getting free trade agreements now. And I'm sure you don't pay attention to this, but we've had Colombia, Peru, Korea, all these countries try. I actually am very pleased to say the last free trade agreement that was passed was the Oman, as in the country of Oman, not Jordan, free trade agreement. And I actually helped get that through Congress. And you can imagine the little country of Oman, which really didn't exist until 1972, is really not a threat in the United States in terms of trade and business. But that was the last free trade agreement we were able to get through, and nothing has gone through since. Why? Because the Democrats, the pro-labor movement in the United States, insisted that we have such high levels of labor protection and environmental safeguards in all these free trade agreements that we can't get free trade agreements passed anymore. Now, I don't know if that's all going to shift with the new Congress coming in, but it's going to be one thing to watch, because if you listen to all the rhetoric, we're going to get Korea through. We're going to get Peru, we're going to open the world up for trade. And I can tell you, you're sitting in a special place because you've already got this free trade agreement. And I'll talk about it when I get into my remarks, I guess. But so, you're really in a good place. Yes? China has no free trade agreement. And in the first, China is a great issue because every politician in America can talk anti-China, and who's going to object? So no, there's no free trade agreement with China. And when we talk about the benefits of the U.S.-Israeli free trade agreement, it matters to you all. Let's say you were going to buy components, bring them to Israel, make widgets or some unknown high-tech device that I've never heard of, and send it to the U.S. You've got to be careful that you make sure you transform your product in Israel, so that when it comes into the U.S., it is an Israeli product. So the country of origin is Israel, so you come in with no duties coming into the U.S. China does not get advantages of any of the free trade agreements. There's no GSP special benefits for China. It's not a newly emerging market. It's none of these other things. So it gets none of the benefits. And the madder the U.S. gets at China, the higher the possibility that we're going to slap duties on Chinese products. I can tell you, I do some work with a company that makes rare earths. I know you all are much more technical than me. Rare earths are, they go into everything from batteries for electronic vehicles to transportation fuels. And China controls 98% of the world's supply. And China just had a little fight with Japan over that ship out there in the water or something. And what did the Chinese do? They said, okay, we're not going to play with you. You can't get any more of our rare earths. Just like that, a blanket prohibition. So the U.S. is watching this, and U.S. companies are mad, and they don't have a lot of resources to protect themselves against China, because obviously China owns half of our debt. So we're doing things like 301 trade actions that take a year. We're going to the WTO to complain about China. But if things don't happen, Congress is going to get involved, and we're going to raise the duties on China, and all the countries that have benefits, like Israel with the free trade agreement, are going to see another huge advantage to bringing products into the market. Okay. I also wanted to, one other point that is huge. Startup Nation, the book, is it popular? Have you all heard of it? Yeah. Okay. Well, it's making a change in the United States. Those gentlemen that wrote that book had no idea that it was going to get out of the business school mentality. And I heard one of the authors speak last week, and he said, he knew it was in the business section of Barnes & Noble next to Freakonomics and something else, and he thought it would sit on the shelf. But it is gaining such a momentum, and what that's doing is it's creating an impression that Israel knows how to do this. Israel knows how to take venture capital, how to make startup companies, how to get to market, And so if you've got a lot of U.S. businesses out there looking for mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of pent-up demand, obviously, because the banks haven't been supplying funding. Venture capitalists are just out there. Companies are waiting for things to happen. I personally can tell you I know some companies looking to invest in markets, and they like Israeli companies because of this reputation that Startup Nation has brought to everybody's attention. And finally, I just wanted to point out that you also may not be aware that Israeli companies or organizations have come in through different chambers of commerce. So there are now other opportunities to market in the U.S. besides traditional means of spending millions of dollars, hiring an ad agency. Israeli has a business center focused on biotech companies. There's one in Baltimore up the street from me because of Johns Hopkins. Different cities have them, different chambers of commerce. Atlanta has a huge U.S.-Israel Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of different things at all different levels are happening to promote and develop business. And again, Israel is a model that other countries are looking to replicate and follow. Okay. Boring background information. We have 3 houses of government that are all involved in trade, and because trade was not something, I guess trade was taken for granted, we have no Department of Trade. We're trying to create one right now. We're trying to merge together all the export controls and tariff reviews and all these things to create an agency of trade. But right now, you've got all 3 parts of our government that you have to pay attention to, because Congress can legislate trade. Congress is in charge of duties on products. And because Congress hasn't been working, it's been very hard to get duties on or off products. So we're stuck in about 30 years ago. Everything that happened 30 years ago still exists now, whether it's relevant or not. Then you've got the judiciary, which of course we're all common law. So our rules are not as predictable and regulatory as yours are, though you do have a mix. But it's the executive branch where it really gets messy. Every single department has a hand in trade. I won't bore you with them all, but the U.S. Trade Representative, that represents the president in international negotiations. And as you mentioned, they're the ones you go to if you want to complain about China. You've got the Commerce Department. They govern dual uses of technology and exports. They're helping to promote U.S. products. They also deal with imports. The International Trade Commission, that's where you go if you've got IP complaints and you want to bring some kind of case to protect your IP. Customs and Border Protection, which is now, since 9/11, part of Department of Homeland Security. That's the agency that polices the border. They get involved in IP issues. They get involved in stopping goods if it says made in Israel, but they think it's made in China. They're also getting a lot more involved in counterfeited goods, gray market goods. And the U.S., our long arm, as they call it, is reaching out and coming outside of the U.S., for example, with FDA, regulatory requirements that the U.S. imposes on drug and device. We're not just sticking with our borders. We're coming over here and investigating and looking at factories to determine compliance before you even bring a product into the U.S. So our entire government is getting more and more involved in trade. One other note on entry requirements. I have an outline which you can have and take home with you. But it's very general, but I just wanted you to see a flow. Entering the U.S. market, bringing your products in. In general, you have to worry about duties when you bring a product in. You have to worry about who's the importer of record, because the importer of record is liable for the duties. And in addition to the duties, since you're not going to really have to worry about duties because you have Israeli products, you have to worry about, let's say, keep going back to you because you asked this question now, let's say you buy some subcomponents that come from China, but China, as they traditionally do, Chinese companies change the value of their products because they have export fines or export taxes coming out of China. If you then take that wrong value, bring that product into the U.S. government is currently investigating Chinese products and happen to be looking at some of these difference in valuation, you bring in this product and you're like, hey, I didn't know about it. It doesn't matter. You're on the hook to the U.S. government. So the point here is we're pushing down responsibility. It's now called informed compliance, shared responsibility. You have a duty as a company to know who you're doing business with and whether they're reliable and legitimate, and you can't turn a blind eye to what is in your product or where your product came from. You have a little bit of a duty to inquire and see. That's a big issue with transshipment and goods going to countries that we don't want to do business with. Another entry issue is labeling. Rules of origin is one part of labeling, but there are other requirements with labeling, and you need to be able to comply with the law when you bring a product in on labeling. Of course, that's really important with textiles, with drugs and devices, medical products. Import standards. I'm trying to get to what might be more interesting. Classification of goods. Excuse me?
Do you know what's the situation in other countries or only the US?
What do you mean? In terms of?
In terms of undervalued.
Undervalued. Well, I can tell you.
Places like this.
I can tell you that other countries.
To undervalue some products. So I don't know what to do.
Well, from my perspective, if I was advising you, is you want to tell the truth, because you can only get in trouble by undervaluing your products, and what is it going to do for you? Now, sometimes they're asking for two invoices. They want the one invoice and the other invoice. I wouldn't do business with them. That's part of the due diligence, because then you think they may be doing other things wrong. It's a choice. That's a business decision. Valuation and classification of goods. I'm sure you're aware when you export goods, there's a harmonized tariff system. It's the harmonized tariff code. There's 6-digit numbers. They're used around the world. We actually go out to 8 or 10 digits because we look at the statistical analysis, because we track all our imports. This tariff number is important because, again, it can affect duties and quotas on goods coming in. The beauty of that for Israeli companies is you really don't have to worry about the duties or the quotas, but you still you're held responsible for making sure you have the right classification. And there's lots of rules on how you determine the right classification. If you classify by use or you classify by whole or parts, if it's a part. Again, you always have to remember that all these rules are 30, 40, 50 years old. So if you're in technology, if you're in emerging markets, it's very hard to figure out where your product may fit. And so that takes extra work. And one overriding comment is, don't be afraid of the U.S. government. They will help you. They will work with you. You just have to get them on the phone. But if you have a classification issue or you're going to bring in a product and you want to know how it will be considered, talk to them in advance. They will work with you. A lot of people are afraid to talk to the U.S. regulatory agencies. I don't know how it is in this country, but the U.S. government is supposed to help you. Value of goods, we talked a little about that. Record keeping. I don't know what it is in Israel, but in the U.S. you must keep all records having to do with any imports or exports for 5 years. And this means everything from your bill of lading, your invoice, your shipping documents, 5 years. Okay, the free trade agreement. The free trade agreement has reduced, for the most part, the duties and all quotas and any import licensing or any of that coming in. There's some exceptions. Agricultural products, there's a special agreement for that. But really, the U.S.-Israeli free trade agreement is very thin compared to other free trade agreements that we're now negotiating. It's like Israel got in before all of the labor unions in the U.S. figured out they didn't want free trade agreements to happen because that was promoting business and exports and taking jobs away from U.S. workers in their mind. So the Israeli free trade agreement has less words in it and less requirements and restrictions on the foreign businesses. It's a huge advantage. The biggest advantage, other than the no duties, is that you qualify for government sales to the U.S. government under the Buy America Act. And the Buy America Act is also very popular now because obviously when you have a bad economy, you look for ways to keep your jobs in the country and to find more jobs at home. So the first step is U.S. government, when it makes procurement decisions, has to buy American. All federal procurement, it gets into U.S. content. And Israeli products are considered U.S. content because of this free trade agreement. As a general rule, there are exceptions. So don't rely, specifically on your product and what I'm saying. But in general, that is a huge advantage. And more importantly, I don't think you're necessarily going to go out and get a government procurement, but you may be selling to U.S. companies that can use your product in their U.S. valuation. That is key because it helps them meet these requirements to be able to sell on huge government contracts. That also applies to small businesses. They also have certain requirements under these federal procurement contracts that they need so much of their value or products that they're selling has to be small business. And sometimes, especially in the high-tech field, they can't find those small business partners or a minority-owned U.S. business. It's another, I don't want to say tricky way because it's not tricky, but if you're trying to enter the U.S. market, you may want to think about partnering or you may want to think about setting up in a hub zone, which is areas that have been created that need development, and you get tax credits and incentives. And you qualify for some of these small business exceptions that larger companies can take advantage of when they go to do government procurement. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I can't do a lecture without mentioning Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It's big. It started in '78 in the United States, came out of Watergate when there's a little corruption in our government. We created the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And what it says is that a U.S. company, I shouldn't say a U.S. company, a U.S. person, and I'll get to that in a second, but a U.S. person cannot pay or offer to pay a foreign government official anything of value to get or retain business. Excuse me. And the reason I'm bringing that up, you may say, well, why are you talking about something that's going out of the country rather than, why are you telling this to us? We want to talk about coming into the U.S. market. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is very popular right now. The Department of Justice, the SEC, they're all over it because it makes great headlines. And they're in the paper that they've cracked down on a payment to some government official somewhere. And they're getting traction because the international organizations are also having anti-corruption agreements. The UK is on board. In fact, the UK, if you violate their anti-corruption or anti-bribery law, there's no mitigation. In the U.S., you can do a voluntary disclosure. You can negotiate with the U.S. government and say, we didn't know it was happening. Some employee wasn't paying attention or did it without permission. In the UK, if it happens, it's automatic penalties, fines, and jail time for individuals. And the UK can take jurisdiction of an Israeli company even if you're not operating in the UK solely by the fact that you're selling in the market. So the UK has gone further extreme than the Europeans and the US. But it matters to US companies because the US government is saying if you're involved in our market or you are related or a subsidiary or involved in a joint venture or the US entity has a foreign office that's tied into you, they're looking for long arms and far-reaching ways to grab foreign companies. And they do it with the help of foreign governments and other anti-corruption acts.
But how about if you pay commission to someone?
Well, if you pay commission, it depends on what you're paying commission to. And that's where it gets, the gray is huge if you're paying commission. What you're supposed to do is, you're supposed to go to the U.S. government first and say, I need to pay commission to this foreign government official because he wears two hats. He's a government official, but he also is a private businessman. And they will either say, yes, that's okay, or no, that's a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it's gotten extremely complicated, and you have to be aware of it. Intellectual property enforcement, I wanted to bring this up because there's a lot of new joint enforcement efforts. In fact, in the Obama White House, they have a newly developed business group. They're setting up a lot of business groups. We don't know what action is coming out of them, but in this instance, I can tell you that they've set up this White House coordinator, and he is coordinating all the different administrative agencies to protect IP so that new technology is going to be safer in the U.S. One part of it is Customs and Border Protection. They're patrolling the borders better. You can actually go to Customs and Border Protection and register your intellectual property so you can try and keep out what you say are counterfeit goods from coming into the U.S. They're working on the gray market issues. Gray market is you've got a product like a Swatch watch. This actually is a case that's going up to the Supreme Court on November 8th. Swatch, everyone knows Swatch, they sell to Costco. Do you all know what Costco is? We have these huge warehouse stores. But Costco got these watches not through an exclusive Swatch distributor. So they're legitimate Swatch watches, but they came into the U.S. in violation of somebody's contract. So that's not something that the government usually, we can't stop everything at the border. We're worried about all the Mexicans coming in and the terrorists and everybody else. But this now is going up to the Supreme Court to decide if Costco has a right to sell that product it bought from a third party that bought those Swatch watches. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. So IP is getting a lot of attention. IP crimes, a lot of different IP issues. There's also a system that manufacturers now can create electronic pedigrees to monitor and track product. I guess more like Israel. I know products here, like if there's salmonella in the system, you can track where the salmonella came from off of the vegetable that it came from. And we're not up to that level, but we're working on it. Okay. Oh, I left securities law there. I thought I moved it. Well, all right. I'll just mention, initially when we made up this outline, we wanted to run through different types of laws that would affect a business coming into the United States. So just a few sentences about the U.S. security laws. The U.S. security laws is all about disclosure and informing the investor. There's two acts, the 33 Act and the 34 Act. The whole goal is to make sure that non-accredited investors, which are not high worth is considered anyone that has an income of $1 million or makes a salary of over $200,000. That's the general rule. There's lots of exceptions and exemptions. But if you're doing more of a public offering or a private offering that hits more of the general public, you must disclose certain information. And the security laws have gotten more complicated with Sarbanes-Oxley, the Patriot Act, terrorism. We're watching money laundering and where money is coming from. So, the anti-fraud provisions talk about insider trading, market manipulation, public takeovers, dealing with customers. And then another aspect of the security laws, as I just mentioned, is that Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the FCPA, because half of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act deals with record keeping. If you are found to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, they can also go after you under the Securities and Exchange Commission, because each piece of paper can be considered a separate fine and a separate violation. So the whole FCPA concept has infiltrated all the different agencies and securities requirements. There's a lot of exemptions to these disclosure rules. I'm sure you've heard Regulation D. And you also should be aware, because we are state regulated for securities, you've got to worry about each of the 50 states and Puerto Rico if you were to offer securities offering in the United States. All right. We'll go to see how much I wanted to use this. Doing business in the U.S. Establishing an entity. I do want to focus a little bit here because I think this is more practical and factors in the whole political reality and everything that's happening. if you're coming into the U.S., I'm often asked a lot, well, I don't want to set up a company because that's too risky at this point. I don't want to put the money into it. I just want to have an entity. It's like they're talking in circles because you can't do business in the U.S. unless you have an entity because you need a tax ID number from the IRS so that you can register to do business. So you can't like halfway come into the U.S. I mean, I suppose you can if you want to be a sole proprietorship. But I wouldn't recommend it. Then you've got liability, and you could make up a business card and you could try. But you're not going to get very far, especially when we're talking about, let's say a large Japanese company calls and says, we don't want to invest in the U.S. Really, we just want to come there and we want to set up a representative office. We don't really have such things. You have to pick one of the entities, the types I'm going to tell you about. And as I said before, I think taxes is the most important thing to think about. I mean, obviously, if you only want to do it a few years, that's one thing. If you only have, how many owners you have, what you see as your exit strategy, they're all relevant, but they're not as relevant. I mean, your goal is to come in, make a lot of money, and either continue to do business or to sell off. So you've got to have a long-term strategy based on taxation because it's going to really affect if you're going to keep your money. Cost of organization and formality of governance, I don't think are really big issues anymore. But okay, so if we look at the sole proprietorship, it is actually, though, the most widely used form of business, which I thought was surprising. I don't know if it's that way in Israel or not. But it's the alter ego of the owner. So, and I don't know about you, but the liability in the U.S., everybody's heard the McDonald's case where the person spilled the hot coffee on them and the millions of dollars. The court did shave that back a little, but the fact of life in the U.S. is that you can be sued. So I would recommend that you get the limited liability protection going forward if you're going to do any type of international business. So the next step up from the sole proprietorship is a general partnership. Partnerships in the U.S. have problems because it's a true legal partnership. Each of you is liable for the debt of the other. So if your partner gets divorced or starts gambling and accrues all these business debts, you're responsible. So again, partnerships are useful for some things, but not really coming into the market and setting up a business to sell 1 million widgets and then sell off to Microsoft, which I guess you could do that from here, so that's probably not a very good example. But partnerships are valuable from the investment perspective, and that's how they're used the most. Partnerships also, you should know, though, from a tax perspective, the money is passed through. The partnership doesn't exist from the IRS's perspective. So that's a good thing. But we've now changed our other companies as well, so you'll get the same effect. A limited partnership, this is a way that you don't have that true sharing of liability with the limited partners. You have a general partner and then a bunch of limited partnerships, and we've set this up for a lot of the real estate investment trusts. They're silent partners. And again, the tax flows through to the individual. But these limited partnerships are very complicated. They're very expensive to set up. This is the one entity where looking at how much it costs to set it up really does factor. So average businesses, corporations, individuals, entrepreneurs do not go into the partnership or limited partnership realm. And of course, the most popular is the corporation. Now, we used to have, everybody's heard of the S Corp, but S Corp is not really a different type of corporation. It's just a tax election that allows you to pass through your profit to the individuals. So it is like a partnership, but you get to call it a corporation, which gives you all the corporate benefits. Corporations in the States are run by a board of directors, which are elected by the shareholders. The directors manage and run and hire and fire. I don't know if this is all review or if this is all interesting and new. Corporations have bylaws, that used to be standard, but now, because of the LLCs that we'll get to, are getting a lot more open, and you can set them up however you want. It used to be standard bylaws. You can still use standard bylaws, so you can write your own. But it's how the company is run. And the whole point of a corporation is to set it up so that you are willing to take risk. And that's why there's risk protection. Your business goes under, you don't lose your house. You don't lose your business. At least you don't lose your other businesses, or you don't lose anything else that you've put in it. You don't necessarily even lose all the assets. So a corporation really does buy you a shield around you and protect you, so long as you're adhering to the rules. I mean, if it's set up as to shelter or to be a pretend business, then you do run the risk of what's called piercing the veil, and they'll come look to you individually. Is it like the NTD in Israel? Yes. Okay. The corporations also can have several different shares of stock. They can get very complicated. They can grow. They can last forever. They can do everything. And we can set them up now in 24 hours. And I'll talk a little about where you set them up in a second. But the limited liability company, excuse me?
How do you close?
How do you close them? Follow the procedures. It's easy. It's not as complicated as in other countries.
In Israel, you can open it in a week or 2 weeks, but then 3 years it takes you to close it.
No. We have a winding down procedure, but it is not like that. Well, and we don't have all the severance obligations that Israel, and I know I'm trying to close the corporation right now in Turkey, and it's like a year-long process, and because see, that gets into the whole, we're more common law. All our law came out of cases. We don't have as much written down that you have to follow all these rules and procedures.
You can open a corporation in a day,
and
run it for 6 months, and then close it.
And you don't even have to close it. You just don't have to renew it. You could be, I would suggest you close it if you were leaving the country and not coming back, because you wouldn't want the risk that somebody else could take the name and start doing business as it, and then somehow it comes out back to bite you because you're still on the books. But a lot of companies I've set up for people, they change their mind, they don't do it, they just don't pay your annual return that comes in. People will set up companies to preserve the name.
You don't have like IRS and zero report.
Well, IRS is different. That gets on the tax side. From the corporate entity state law perspective, you can shut down a corporation, because if you set up a company in Delaware, which that's the most common place to set up a company, because its laws are set up to protect corporations above all other states. You have to have a registered agent in the state of Delaware. That's the one requirement. So you have to pay this registered agent $100 a year to be your agent, and so they'll receive papers if you're sued. So you will have to renew them every year, and you can just not renew them. You won't have your registered agent, and the winding up procedures will depend on what's in your bylaws. So if your bylaws don't have extensive, if it's just a one-man shop, you're president, and your brother's the secretary, your best friend, you can shut it down almost overnight. It's very simple.
Is there any limitation to non-U.S. citizens?
No. None. Anyone can do anything. You are expected to pay taxes on your U.S. business in the U.S. Let me just quickly finish with the limited liability company.
Bank account and everything.
Bank account, to set up a bank account, and this is all since 9/11, because of terrorism and the Patriot Act now, things are a lot tighter. To open a bank account, it's more like the rest of the world. Never in the past did we have to show our passport pages and all of that to set up a bank account. Now we're having to do that because they want to know where the money's coming from. So it's much more complicated than it used to be to set things up, but anyone can do it. But to run a business, you will need a tax ID number. To get a tax ID number, you have to file with the IRS. No. Sole proprietorship, you do not need it. Well, you'd have to register to do business, but you would do it as an individual, and you could just hang out a shingle. the tax ID number, how would you have I guess you would go get a tax ID number. You get that from the IRS, though. You have to call them up, and the individual has to be on the phone with them to get it. Like because you can't do business without the tax ID number. LLCs. I want to talk for a second about LLCs because they're even easier than corporations. And you're used to the corporation name, but an LLC, you don't even need, you don't have a board of directors, you don't have the traditional articles of association to set it up and bylaws. You have a one-page thing, and then you have an operating agreement. And the operating agreement you do yourself. It can be as complicated or simplistic as you want. It could be one page. So LLCs have become the norm, the standard. Everything is an LLC. You get the same limited liability protection. It has the maximum flexibility of any entity that's listed here. What else would be important? Oh, then the LLCs have no restrictions on who can own them. You don't have to elect that subchapter S or any of that stuff like with a corporation. The problem with LLCs from an Israeli individual or company point of view is that it may be harder to attract investment and investors and capital or venture capitalists because you have less structure. They may require your operating agreement to have certain terms, so you may have to revise your operating agreement. But with a corporation, you're supposed to have meetings, board of directors meetings, where you take minutes, and it's more formalistic. Now, again, your bylaws can say we don't have to have an annual meeting, but traditionally that's what a corporation does. The LLC doesn't have any of that. So they're especially good if you're not sure what you're doing, if you're a small company and don't want to be bothered to have meetings.
How complex is converting your company from LLC to corporation?
You really wouldn't convert. You would just, you'd set up a corporation, and then.
I'm thinking, for the sake of simplicity, you might want to start as an LLC. And once you're.
Why would you want to change to a corporate? Well, because if you want an investor, if they want you, they probably would just have you revise your operating agreement so that whoever they want to have control, they want the members. So you'd have to redo a lot of things anyway because somebody else would be buying the company. So your whole membership's going to change. So you may end up becoming a corporate structure. But those transfers and transactions are done all the time, changing the entity structure. Because like we said, we can open and close entities pretty easily.
Just asking, I understand that you might need to abide by the bylaws. For instance, once you seek an investment. The question is whether you need to re-register or change the way you're registered in order to become a corporation.
No, you would have to register as a corporation. And you would then need your board of directors and your owners, but that would all be part of your either merger or asset acquisition or whatever it is. The new owners would be happy to tell you how they want it.
You're discussing the legal aspects of changing entities, but in many cases, at least from what I've learned in Israel, it always comes with the accounting aspect.
I was just going to say, I think it's tax-driven.
Then maybe you need, it's a tax event, and then you need to pay for it.
That's why whether it's an asset purchase, so it's not a tax event, or it's a merger, that's why you see a lot more of that rather than a sale, to avoid that. I also still use offshore entities, and I don't know how big offshore entities are in Israel, but they've lost a lot of their cachet because, again, the U.S. government needs money and is paying a lot more attention to the IBMs, IBM has a BVI parent holding company, and a lot of their profit is offshore. Well, no, the corporations can do it. Individuals, the U.S. government now, if you are a U.S. person and you're now set up, you're retiring, so you take your money to Panama, so you don't have to pay U.S. tax anymore, you're going to live in Panama, the U.S. government is trying to get to that money. But they haven't come after the corporations yet. Corporations still can benefit from having these holding companies. So if you're doing offshore business or want to reinvest in Costa Rica or somewhere, there's still, you look at the accounting aspect of how to do the transfer and where to do the parent.
Which what Peter is making very efficiently.
Right.
An article this morning in the newspaper exactly how Google works with Google in Bermuda.
Well, probably Bermuda. BVI and Bermuda are the
Google
biggest.
in Ireland and
Right.
Google in the
Because
Netherlands.
Ireland is another big tax.
And then in the Netherlands, so they pass stuff from Israel through Ireland and Netherlands and pay tax, or don't pay tax.
Right.
In,
And worse, the U.S. government is so slow, it's not going to catch up to this
so
for
they say
another,
that
you know.
Google pays only 2.4% taxes.
But that's okay, because that gives them more money to invest in Israel. Because they're all those companies are growing here with their R&D. So far that's still legal. I just wanted to mention, like, California. Everybody loves California. It's corporations in California have a lot more regulations depending on the industry you're in. You want to pay attention to what state you choose, because you can't just come to the U.S. and be a U.S. company. You've got to pick one of our states. California has, you know, all these environmental restrictions. It's very progressive and very green and all of that, but the costs are high going into California. Some states also you want to think about don't have state tax, like Delaware, Oregon. And then there's another aspect. If you're going to be living there, Tennessee and some other states don't have state income tax. And you want to look at income tax, corporate tax. Like I said, I think everything's tax driven. Who wants to live in Tennessee? A lot of venture capitalists. And the cost of living is a lot lower in Tennessee. And if you like country music, the whole music industry. And I think they have more boats. No, it's Michigan that has more boats per capita if you want to be up north. And FedExpress is there, so there's a lot of good air transportation. Tax. Okay, contracts. I don't want to bore you with specifics, but I want to make sure that you just at least have been through some of this. In the United States, you can have an oral contract as well as a written contract. Would not advise it. Obviously, you want everything in writing because you want key provisions. Contracts are so driven by which side you're on, it's hard to talk about them because the provisions change if you're a buyer or a seller. Even in terms of importing and exporting, Incoterms are internationally recognized set of rules for when liability transfers between the parties doing business. And this is where FOB, everybody's heard of FOB, and CIF, they all have particular meaning of when liability and risk of loss ship, when your product crosses the ship's rail, et cetera, et cetera. If those terms are not in your contract, you can be caught unaware because on the back of those shipping invoices and documents, there's a limitation of liability of $50 for the carrier. The ocean carrier is never liable. Federal Express is never liable. UPS is never liable. It's always going to be the person who... Excuse me? So you pay insurance. Okay, pay insurance. That's true. But you also can protect yourself with some of your contract terms. The devil is in the detail. And I just wanted to point out, as in any country, you want to think of what your exit... A lot of people don't think about exit benefits for contracts and where you want to go at the end of that contract. They just think, well, we'll just extend every year. But you want to think about how you get out of this, if it's working and if it's not working, and what your remedies and liabilities will be. And what I think is important is enforcement. If you need to collect your money, are you going to go in and sue them somewhere? Or let's say that's not your concern. Your concern is IP. It doesn't matter that you've got arbitration, because if you've got an IP problem and somebody is stealing your IP, you need an immediate remedy. You're not going to have time for whatever the contract says about long-term relief.
When you talk about arbitration, in many contracts which you do with the U.S., you always say, okay, New York, somewhere in New York. Now, why is that? Is New York better, cheaper?
No, New York is another state that if you do a lot of buying and selling of companies, their common law is developed further than most. You make fun of Tennessee. There'd be less law that's going to support those type of activities in Tennessee than there would be in New York. I mean, sometimes people pick just a matter of convenience. If it's a Tennessee contract with an Israeli, New York may be the city you want to go if you've got to arbitrate. But they also, there's two things. You're picking location and you're picking substantive law. So you have to be careful as to choice of law and choice of venue. But that is why they pick New York, because they think New York is going to be more favorable to business. But like I said, if you're the little guy in the deal, you may want a state law that's more favorable to the little guy, not the big guy in the deal.
So the little guy, what should you pick?
It depends on the industry. Like, believe it or not, Mississippi has very high developed law in the healthcare industry. Delaware is always good for corporation and minority shareholders. I think New Jersey is as well with minority shareholder interests. But that is something that you don't normally think about as to where you want to be. So it depends on what side you're on. Intellectual property, who's going to retain the ownership rights? This is standard. Exclusivity, non-exclusivity. I don't know if you're talking about that at all, but I know that often gets ignored with IP rights. Think up front about geographical limitations. Like, do you want whoever, if you're bringing the IP in, what if there are new developments? Who gets rights to it when the contract is over? Do you want them to have, is the entire U.S.? Does that include Puerto Rico? Does it include North America, Canada, and Mexico? What can you limit, and if you want to limit it? And do you want a fee for it? Let's see. I think the most important issues when you're dealing with the contracts, you really need to make a checklist and think through them and sort of have somebody issue spot with you. Have you thought about dispute settlement? Have you thought about what if you need to change something? Both parties or all parties have to agree. Do you want it in writing? What about representations and warranties? I don't know how this is in Israel, but we're getting more, because of this, going back to what I talked about, shared compliance or shared responsibility, informed compliance. You may want to make the company that you're doing business give a representation that it is the company that says it is. It has money to do what it says it can do, that its owners haven't violated any laws, just to give you some comfort with who you're doing business with. You may want them now, we sign off on certifications, that they certify that they're not going to violate the U.S. Patriot Act, they're not going to have any money laundering activities, they're not going to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. As much as it can't prevent bad things from happening, but it spots the issues and it puts them on notice that you're trying to do the right thing, and that can help you in the future if you run into trouble. We have a lot of warranties if you're selling products, not so much as with services, but we get into a lot of mercantability and different issues, what you warrant with a product for the consumer, or if you're selling business to business. And you need to know about whether those warranties are going to be passed through and what are expected of you in terms of risk and liability. So that's another whole area to think about. Who's responsible for consequential damages if something happens down the road? I love this cartoon I had coming out of law school where the farmer is on the stand in this court and the lawyer is saying, aha, you admit it. You sold the grain. No, you sold the wheat that became the grain that went into the alcohol that was sold to the bar that the kid had that then killed my client's child. I mean, that's how crazy the liability can get, and that's why it's important not to over-worry you, but to be prepared in the U.S. that you've got as much protection going in on warranties and liability issues. Okay, and one further point on that is indemnity. Following on reps and warranties is indemnities. Always try to get the other party to indemnify you to make you whole if something happens, especially if you're dealing with suppliers. So I don't know if you buy things from the U.S. and they go into component parts and materials, but you want them to indemnify you if anything goes wrong. And there are all different levels of those indemnities. Dispute resolution we just touched on. Arbitration has become like the norm over the years, but it only works for certain type of contracts. Like I said, if you're just trying to collect money, arbitration may not be the right answer for you. Again, I think that's all driven by enforcement. You want to know where they have their money. You might want to ask that in your due diligence up front. If they only have money in one country, what good is it going to do you to get a judgment somewhere else and then you can't enforce it? Okay, confidential information. Confidential information needs to be defined in your agreement. I don't know if it's defined in Israel by law, if it means anything. I'm assuming not. I'm assuming it's all the same. But it has to be very specifically defined and as broad as you can make it if you're the one that wants the protection. Include technical, include non-technical. Even think about sales and marketing research. Think about graphic things, oral things, whatever you can come up with. And if there's further developments, if you come to the U.S., and you give them marketing material to help you devise a marketing strategy, make sure that you're protected, that anything they come up with they can't take and use for something else. This includes trade secrets, competitor information, if you have any of that, what the limit. You want to make sure that you're specific, that it can't be used by the person you're giving it to or to any third party or for any purpose that could benefit a competitor. This gets into the non-disclosure agreements, which are usually separate. And I don't know if it's done here, but before you come and meet with anyone to discuss doing business or sharing your secrets or doing a joint venture with them, immediately, the first meeting, you may want to get a one-page non-disclosure agreement that they're not going to talk about or give away or discuss anything that you're discussing with them. I mean, even lawyers have to sign this. When I go meet with new clients, I'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. Okay, this gets us to risk management. Yes?
Is the NDA strong enough to protect the small person?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, how do you define strong enough? You still have to enforce it, but you have it in writing that they agree that they're not going to disclose whatever you tell them. And if you have evidence that they did disclose it, you then can use your non-disclosure agreement to protect you.
In other words, is it better to go to the individual person or to the company?
I would go to the individual person. Well, I guess specifically, but they're also going to sign on behalf of the company. But that is a good point. Individuals have to sign non-disclosure agreements. But if you are concerned about the whole company, you could put something in your non-disclosure agreement that no one else in his company may share. I mean, if it's a small company, you're going to want to get each individual to sign. Because the other members of that company, if they haven't personally signed, how are you going to be able to reach out and stop them? They could say, I wasn't in the room, he just told me. So what you do is you put in that one agreement that he can't discuss it with anyone in his company either. So that way, if it gets out, you can come back to him. But usually it's done with each individual. A corporation does not sign an NDA, an individual does. That's a really good question. Okay, risk management. I don't know how far you want to go with this, but risk management can do a lot of things. Mitigate your losses, save you money, reduce a negative public image. It can help prevent employee morale problems. It can help set you up for an export strategy. But the important thing I wanted to mention about risk management is, again, you've got to remember that we're a federal system in that you've got U.S. laws, and then you also have state laws. You also have municipalities that could have laws. So there's different levels of risk, and there's all different kinds of risk. I just made a list as an example of our employee-related risks. You know, we've got everything from workers' comp to safety, occupational safety, hazardous risks. So you've got concerns about whistleblowers. If you've got a company if you have an Israeli company, you own a U.S. company, and you're selling to Syria, I'm sure you wouldn't want to do that, but let's just say you did, and a whistleblower told the U.S. government, and it's a violation of our transaction regulations, our Treasury Department regulations to sell to Syria, and a whistleblower tells the government that, that's a risk you probably didn't think about. So the strategy when managing risk is, a little company isn't going to go buy insurance for all of this. So I think the best extent that you can, you want a strategy that thinks about how to minimize your risk going into the market. I'm just raising points. I don't have an answer here. There's no, but just think about how best to protect yourself. Think about that you're going to have labor laws if you hire people. Think about your insurance and how much it's going to cost, and factor it all into your business plan and profit structure. And use contracts as much as you can. And you can outsource personnel. You can do other things to minimize the risk. Let's go. Oh, God. Okay. Intellectual property, you all know what it is. I mean, I can answer questions if you have it. I want to go to marketing because I think this is more fun. Now, let me tell you, I'm not a marketing specialist, but I have done better than what I could ever tell you about marketing because I went to a friend of mine who gets paid like thousands and thousands of dollars to teach marketing to Google and Microsoft and Oracle and HP. He's a professor at Georgetown University. He gave me his secrets to marketing. He's got a book that's coming out. He didn't even tell me the name, so we can't promote his book yet. But he taught me how to teach his marketing strategy to you. So I think this is good.
No NDA?
No NDA. He did not make me sign an NDA. And he said I could have it all. He invented the Energizer Bunny. You know that bunny for Energizer batteries? And he did that for free. It was before he figured out that he could get paid to do this. So. What? Okay, he said to me, when you run your own business, you have to do it all, whether it's a corporation or an individual. And marketing is only one piece of it. But in his mind, it's the whole piece. It's the biggest thing. There's this one piece. He says, everything supports marketing because without marketing, you're not going to have a business. This is the Professional Association's definition of marketing. Marketing is an organizational function and a set of processes for creating, communicating, and delivering value to customers and for managing customer relationships in ways that benefit the organization and stakeholders. I know this is a second language for most of you, but it's like you really have to think about this to get anything out of this. It doesn't really tell you anything. So, here's his definition for marketing. We don't have time, so I can't let you try and figure it out. I'm telling you, he does this to big companies, so don't make fun of what I tell you his definition is. It's so what and who cares. I'm going to explain it all to you, but that's his two questions he says that you need to ask. So what and who cares? If you took away all the questions here, he says, normally when people talk about marketing, they talk about their audience, and they have this balanced approach. You have to balance, effort and value. And he says it's not actually a balanced approach. It's tilted. Because you have to look at it so that the side that focuses on the customer goes up. It's not about you, it's about what they want. I have this in here because I'm supposed to have taken this one out. Okay, if you're Procter & Gamble and you make, say, 4 different kinds of detergent, Gain, Tide, Cheer, and ERA, and you've got customers down here. This is the normal way you think about marketing. We've got our products, and they go to the customer. He says we've got it wrong. You need to invert it. You need to look at it as the company, the customers, and then the products. because the customers, you're just competing. They're going to buy a laundry detergent. Who cares which one? These are all commodities. Who cares which one they're going to buy? You don't want to be a laundry detergent on this list, where they're going to buy the cheapest one that's on sale that week at the store. That's not what you want. In the circle here, that would be this part. They're going to buy one laundry detergent, and that's too hard. It's too hard to make money to do that. That's not where you want to focus. You want to focus on this part. Your competitors aren't there yet. You want to get in here. You want to be able to provide a benefit that the other guy hasn't thought of yet. This is all going to come together and make sense. At least I hope. The part where it overlaps with your competitors, that's too competitive. You're just competing with your competitors. You don't want to compete with your competitors. You want to add value and get to the customers. So, how do you get to the customers without wasting your time directly competing? Now he says, I've got the statistics somewhere, that like 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers. So you focus on the customers that you have and grow the business from them. And we're going to get to how you do it. He says you've got to start analyzing where the profit is and what's the best part of our industry to get in, and then how to get there, and then how to keep, and then how to expand. And that, oh shoot, all right, that's all I gave you. All right, skip that. Let me give you more on how to do it. You need to get to the competitive advantage, which gets back in here, down there to the bottom. You have to ask different questions. You have to ask, what is it that they want? You need to work, here's where the backwards comes in. We're selling these products. It's what are the customers not getting? Because you don't want to sell commodity because if somebody else comes in the market and underprices you, you're going to lose everything. So you've got to find a niche, you've got to be different. And how do you do that? He says it all hinges on research and changing the questions and your focus. You've got to spend time, not necessarily money, but you've got to spend time and figure out what the customer wants, how you can say it differently. You've got to go and actually analyze the market. And that gives you your competitive advantage. He does great things where we make these circles and you start naming things like what you're going to bring to the market and what your competitor is going to bring to the market. And of course, what you find out through an hour class is that it's actually the same things. And that's why you're not growing and not getting above the competitor. So you have to bring something different. First thing you have to do is benchmark what you and the competitor's doing, and then look for where the opportunities are that haven't been approached. I know this is like, well, of course, this is stupid. But he says people don't go to the next level. They don't turn this around in their mind, and instead of thinking, here are our products, you go down to really talking to the customers and figuring out, well, okay, yeah, we won't mind paying a lot of money for coffee, but we want Starbucks. We want something different. Okay. So I understand that in Israel, Starbucks is the only place that it hasn't made it. And apparently they didn't do good market research. And they're known for their market research. I mean, they're in Turkey, and that's a tea country. It didn't work here, so they did something wrong. They didn't come talk to the people. They didn't figure out what the competitor here is doing right, which was knocking them out everywhere along the line. So he says that you've got to do the research, you've got to meet with the people, and you've got to give them exactly what it is that they want through focus groups and education. And he says it's worth the time. You need to talk to them about what are their strategies, what are their objectives, what will make them happy. And you need to appeal, is to the emotional level. Not just the commodity again, not the price, but they have to feel. And Starbucks has succeeded in that. I don't like Starbucks coffee. I think it's too bitter. And it's expensive and it's stupid. But do I go buy Starbucks coffee? Absolutely I do. I can't even tell you why. There's some emotional thing. It's a good break. People like to take 15 minutes off of work and go to Starbucks. They have other things. It's cool to drink Starbucks. I mean, it makes no sense. Yeah, it's unbelievable. So he had this great trade-off and figuring out how to get you from one product that is on the same level, one type of aspirin versus another aspirin, and you've got to appeal to that emotional level, and you have to do it by actually going and analyzing the customer. The key is the customer. I know this sounds very elementary, but take it home, think about it, and you can apply it to any business. You can apply it to legal, you can apply it to HP. He turned Microsoft when they had some problems around with it. It's understanding the customer. What you sell, well, his point was, what you sell is not necessarily what people buy. So you have to sell what they want, sell what they buy, and look at all the intangibles, what's articulated and what's not articulated, and look at their behaviors. Like I said, I can say, well, I don't like Starbucks, but my behavior is I go to Starbucks. So for whatever that is worth, he says for B2B business, you've got to focus on how it makes you feel. And then he's got another example with iPod and Apple, and it's all about how you feel. So with that, thank you very much. I took my time. And I'll turn my microphone over.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Very excellent lecture. אוקיי, באמת הרצאה מאוד מעניינת למי שצריך להיכנס לארצות הברית. אין תחליף לשליטה בפרטים האלה. אנחנו נמשיך עם עורך דין משה כאן. הוא ידבר איתנו על הסכמי הפצה בלעדיים עם ספקים מחו"ל. עורך דין משה כאן בהופיע בעבר בפורום שלנו, הוא מתמחה מהמשפט העסקי, מלווה באופן שוטף חברות ישראליות וחברות בינלאומיות ידיעות הפועלות בישראל, מייצג ידיעים ועסקאות ישראליות מתקדמות בארץ ובחו"ל, וייצוג בתביעות מסחריות בבתי משפט ובבוררויות. אני שמח מאוד.
100%, תודה.
בבקשה.
מישהו מעביר לי את המצגת? First of all, Doreen, thanks a lot. This was very interesting, very educating. I enjoyed it. עכשיו נעבור קצת להרצאה בשפה שלנו. ואתה יכול רק להחליף את המצגת, בבקשה? דרך המחשב. אוקיי. אז הנושא שלנו, הסכמי הפצה בלעדית. בעצם, להשיג זכות להפצה בלעדית למוצר כלשהו, זאת משאת נפשו של כל איש עסקים. אני לא מדבר רק על מכוניות, תמרוקים, כל מותג שאתם יכולים לחשוב עליו, קוקה קולה, הגנדז, מייקרוסופט, כל האנשים, כל העסקים הישראלים שמחזיקים בזיכיונות האלה, הם בעצם כולם אנשים שהצליחו להשיג זכות הפצה בלעדית. מה זה זכות הפצה בלעדית? זאת זכות שהספק, הספק של אותם מוצרים אומר, אני מספק את זה למדינה הזאת רק לך. עכשיו, אנחנו חיים בתקופה שיש גם הרבה יבוא מקביל, אז זה כבר לא אותו דבר כמו שזה היה פעם, אבל גם היום אנחנו רואים מקרים שאנשים נוסעים לחול, רואים איזשהו מוצר, רואים איזשהו קונספט, מצליחים, אפילו אנשים בלי הרבה אמצעים, מצליחים לשכנע את הספק, את היצרן, לתת להם את הזכות הקטנה הזאת של המדינה הקטנה הזאת במזרח התיכון עם 7 מיליון תושבים, והם מצליחים לקבל את הזכות הזאת, והם פותחים פה שוק, והם מגדילים את השוק, והשוק הזה נהיה שוק, והעסק הזה נהיה עסק מאוד מאוד מצליח. כמובן שככל שהמוצר הוא יותר יוקרתי, הוא יותר מחיר, השוק שלו יותר גדול, אז הסיכוי של איש עסקים עם פחות רקורד ופחות אמצעים הוא יותר קטן. ומטבע הדברים, אז אנשים מנסים להתרכז ולהגיע למוצרים שהם מאמינים שהם יכולים לקבל לגביהם את זכות ההפצה הבלעדית. וברגע שהם מקבלים את זכות ההפצה הבלעדית, הם מקבלים חוזה. והחוזה הזה זה משהו כזה, עשרות דפים, כולם בשפה זרה, בדרך כלל באנגלית, והם מתלבטים. ההתלבטות הראשונה שלהם זה, האם בכלל כדאי לי להתחיל לדבר עם הספק על ההסכם? אולי החוצפה שלי לבוא ולדבר איתו על ההסכם ולהגיד לו, תשמע, אני רוצה תנאים כאלה, אני רוצה תנאים אחרים, אולי הוא בכלל יגיד, אתה יודע מה, לא צריך, אני אלך למישהו אחר. אז התשובה היא לא. התשובה היא, כן, אפשר לנהל משא ומתן עם הספק, ולא משנה מי אתה, ולא משנה מה אתה הולך להפיץ, הוא רגיל לזה, הוא יודע שאתה תעשה את זה. זה ברור שבהרבה נושאים אין סיכוי שאתה תוכל לשנות את דעתו, אבל גם אם לא תצליח, לפחות תדע מהם הסיכונים שאתה לוקח על עצמך. אז קודם כל אמרנו, זה לא יבטל את המינוי ברוב המקרים. השאלה אם הוא יסכים, זה תלוי. בתנאים המסחריים יש סיכוי שהוא יסכים. בדברים האחרים זה תלוי במשא ומתן, זה תלוי כמה באמת הוא רוצה לחדור לכאן, כמה חשוב לו שיהיה שוק מקומי, וגם תלוי בהוגנות שלו. אני יכול להגיד לכם שאני ראיתי הסכמי בלעדיות מאוד מאוד הוגנים, ורובם לא כל כך הוגנים, אבל שוב, שווה לנסות את המשא ומתן, ובכל מקרה לא כדאי לחתום על הסכם כזה בלי לבדוק אותו ובלי לנהל משא ומתן, כי הסיכונים, כמו שתראו תכף, הם די גדולים. כן. אז דווקא, זה חשוב, כי זה החלק הבא שלה, זה דווקא היה בהמשך, דווקא הנושא של הפצה בלעדית על ידי ספק למפיץ, כשהמפיץ מתחייב לקנות רק מהספק, והספק מתחייב למכור רק למפיץ, זה אחד החריגים לחוק ההגבלים העסקיים. זה אחד החריגים לחוק ההגבלים העסקיים, ולכן טענה כזאת מצד ספק, הוא כנראה לא מכיר את החוק המקומי, ולפי החוק המקומי זה אחד החריגים. שוב, אנחנו עושים הסכמים כאלה דבר יום ביומו עם חברות גדולות מאוד, לא נתקלנו בטענה הזאת עד היום, כולל חברות אמריקניות. אחד הדברים שאנחנו צריכים לקחת בחשבון ברגע שאנחנו הופכים להיות מפיץ בלעדי, זה שרוב הסיכויים שהספק גם ידרוש מאיתנו לא למכור מוצרים מתחרים. כי אם אני נגיד הופך להיות מפיץ של מוצרי קוסמטיקה או ביסום, לא יכול להיות מבחינתו שאני אמכור מוצרים מתחרים. אבל גם הנושא הזה הולך ומתפוגג. ככל שאתה יותר מעורה בתחום וככל שהספק ישתכנע שאתה תדאג למוצרים שלו, יש סיכוי שהוא יסכים. אם מדובר במוצר ייחודי, עם שוק מאוד ייחודי, רוב הסיכויים שהוא לא יסכים. מה זה הבלעדיות? על הבלעדיות הזאת יש כמה חלקים. קודם כל, בואו נראה על מה אני הופך להיות בלעדי. אנחנו מקבלים רשימה של מוצרים בתוך ההסכם, ואנחנו יודעים שהמוצרים האלה הם המוצרים שלגביהם אני הולך להיות המפיץ היחידי בישראל. שאלה היא, האם הספק יכול מחר להוציא חלק מהמוצרים, להעביר אותם למישהו אחר, ליצור פה איזושהי סלקציה? זה דברים שצריך להתעקש עליהם כבר בהתחלה ולהגיד, תקשיב, כל עוד שאני המפיץ שלך בלעדי, אני רוצה את כל המוצרים שלך להפיץ בארץ. אתה לא רוצה למכור את כולם בישראל? בסדר גמור. מה שאתה מוכר, אני אהיה המפיץ שלך. יהיו מוצרים נוספים שתרצה, אני המפיץ שלך. תכניס לתוך הליין, לתוך הקו מוצרים חדשים, אני אהיה המפיץ שלך. אלו הן דרישות לגיטימיות מצד מפיץ בלעדי, שבעצם הולך ובונה שוק בשביל הספק. הוא בונה שוק, הוא משקיע בזה כסף, הוא משקיע בפרסום, תכף נראה את זה, ולכן אלו דרישות לגיטימיות שבהחלט שווה לעלות ויש סיכוי רב שיתקבלו. מהי הטריטוריה? אוקיי, הטריטוריה כאן בישראל היא בדרך כלל ידועה, יש כאלה כותבים כן מזרח ירושלים, לא מזרח ירושלים, שטחים כן או לא, מדובר בסך הכל, או בוא נגיד ברוב המקרים, זה תלוי במוצר, אני מניח שהיום הסוגיה הזאת כבר לא כל כך רלוונטית, אבל השאלה אם אפשר לקבל עוד מדינות כאן באזור. מה לגבי מדינות כמו קפריסין, טורקיה, בולגריה, רומניה? כבר ראיתי הסכמים שבא ספק ואומר, אתה יודע מה? קח עוד כמה מדינות, תנסה לפתח גם שם, שווה לנסות, בהחלט, אם אין שם מפיץ בלעדי אחר, שווה לנסות. עכשיו, אנחנו רואים בכל הסכמי ההפצה האלה תנאים שהספק דורש כתנאי לבלעדיות. הרי הספק, ברור לכם שהוא לא ייתן למפיץ שבקושי מוכר את הסחורה, בקושי מקדם את המותג, הוא לא ייתן לו להישאר לעולמי עד מפיץ בלעדי. הוא בוודאי ידרוש ממנו עמידה ביעדים, והיעדים האלה כמובן מתקדמים עם השנים. כל שנה היעדים האלה, כמו שמקובל במחירות, הם הולכים ומתקשחים. אחד הדברים שכדאי לשים לב אליהם זה לנושא של סך הכל רכישות מול סך הכל מחירות. אחד הדברים שאסור לתת למפיץ להיכנס לתוכם זה השאלה כמה אני אמכור בשנה. מה שכן לגיטימי מבחינתו לדרוש זה כמה אתה תרכוש ממני. מה שנקרא minimum purchases, זה מותר. מותר לי להגיד לו, מותר לספק להגיד, אתה תקנה ממני בשנה $1,000,000. בסדר גמור. אבל להגיד, אתה תמכור בארץ $2 מיליון, זה כבר הוא לא יכול לעשות, זה כבר גובל גם בהתערבות, זה גורם גם בעבירה על חוק ההגבלים עסקיים, אנחנו תכף נגיע לזה. הוצאות פרסום ושיווק, זה אחד הנושאים שיעלו. הרי כדי למכור, כדי לעמוד ביעדים, אני חייב להוציא כסף, אני חייב לפרסם, חייבים להכיר אותי באינטרנט, חייבים להכיר אותי בטלוויזיה, בעיתונות, הדברים האלה עולים כסף, שווה לנהל משא ומתן עם הספק בנושא הזה, לראות אם הוא משתתף. חלק מהחומרים אגב, הם חומרים שנעשו בחול. אתם רואים את הפרסומות בטלוויזיה, הרבה מהם, אתם רואים את הפנים, הם לא צולמו בארץ, זה לא ישראלים, אלו פרסומות שצולמו בחול, מומנו בחול, והספק יכול לתת לי אותם, ואז אני חוסך הרבה מהוצאות הפרסום, ואולי הוא גם משתתף בעלויות האלה של הפרסום. דרישה למחירי מינימום ומחירי מקסימום. פעם היינו רואים את זה יותר, היום פחות. בכל העולם כבר הנושא של חוק ההגבלים עסקיים מגביל את האפשרות של ספק לדרוש ממפיץ או להכתיב לו באיזושהי צורה את המחיר. מה? קרוקס. מה עם קרוקס?
קבעו מחיר וזהו, אותו דבר אפס.
אוקיי. אני רוצה לעשות כמה הבדלים. יש הבדל בין מחיר מומלץ שהספק נותן, מחיר מומלץ, recommended price, שזה מותר לעשות, כל עוד שרואים שאין דרך לעקוף את המחיר המומלץ, זאת אומרת לעקוף באלף, לבין דרישה של הספק להכתיב את מחירי הרכישה. ברור שהספק רוצה לשמור על המותג. ברור שהספק רוצה שהמחירים יעלו. זה ברור. לא תמיד, לפעמים הוא רוצה להגדיל שוק, אבל מצד שני, החוק אוסר עליו להתערב. ברגע שאני מפיץ, אסור לספק בשום אופן להתערב במחירים בשוק, ואם הוא עושה את זה, זאת עבירה גם שלו וגם שלי על חוק ההגבלים עסקיים. עוד שנייה אחת, מהי מחירי מינימום? מהי מחירי מקסימום? מחירי מקסימום הם בעצם נועדו לטובת הצרכן. בעצם בא הספק ואומר, הוא אומר, אל תמכור יותר מ-X. גם פה מסתבר שיש עדיין הגבלה מבחינה חוקית, אפשר לבוא ולבקש מרשות ההגבלים העסקיים פרה-רולינג, וברוב המקרים הם יסכימו, יש גם פטור כללי לעניין הזה. בואו נאמר שדרישה למחירי מקסימום זו דרישה שאפשר לעמוד בה. רצית לשאול. לספק אסור להתערב בכל אחד מהדברים האלה. כשאנחנו מדברים על הפצה בלעדית, אנחנו מדברים על חוזה בין הספק לביני, המפיץ. יכול להיות שבדרך יש עוד שרשור, אבל מבחינת החוק אסור לספק להתערב באף לא אחד מהשלבים האלה, כיוון שמטרת החוק להגן על הצרכן. החוק רוצה לוודא שהתחרות בשוק תשמר, שהספק לא ישפיע על המחירים לצרכן.
נניח במקרה שהיה של פרופ,
כן.
יש, או עדיין, יש, היצרן הוא נניח קנדי, יש ספק שהוא השחקן הבלעדי בישראל,
כן.
והוא מפיץ את זה לחנויות.
כן.
הם קבעו את המחיר בצורה מאוד קשיחה.
אתה מדבר על הספק או על המפיץ? אתה מדבר על המפיץ. כן, המפיץ.
השאלה אם מפיץ לא נחשב הספק של החנויות.
גם למפיץ בארץ, גם למפיץ, אסור לקבוע מחיר לקמעונאי, לחנות הסופית. ואם הוא עשה את זה, ומישהו מחליט ששווה לפתוח בחקירה, אני מניח שיפתחו בחקירה. העניין הוא שצריך כמובן להוכיח שזה מה שנעשה, שהוא באמת הכתיב את המחיר ולא קבע מחיר מומלץ. בהחלט מקום לחקירה. אני חושב שהתקופה של קרוקס עברה, זו הייתה תקופה שלפני 4 שנים, אני לא יודע אם היום זה גם חל, אבל זה אחד הדברים
חדירה זה היה משהו
אני יודע על מה אתה מדבר.
הוא היה מעיף את הרשיונות.
כן, כן.
אותו דבר גם אם זה הפוך, אם אני ספק שרוצה להפיץ דרך מפיץ בארצות הברית,
כן.
עדיין, גם בארצות הברית חלים החוקים האלה שאני לא יכולה לקבוע את
גם בארצות הברית חלים חוקי ההגבלים העסקיים. לא, שם יש את ה-Sherman Act, נכון? In the US, about Antitrust, Sherman Act, Clayton Act, right? בארצות הברית יש דינים אחרים, אבל הקונספט הוא אותו קונספט. הקונספט הוא להגן על הצרכן, לאפשר תחרות, לא לאפשר להכתיב מחירים עד רמת הצרכן. טוב. תנאי המחיר. סליחה, כן.
יש שם מבצע של 3 שוקולדים של מרס ב10 שקלים, זה בכל הרשתות.
כן.
וגם כשזה יש מבצע בלעדי, זה בכל הרשתות.
שוב, יש לי הרגשה שבמקרה הזה הרשתות מחכות אחת את השנייה, אבל אי אפשר, יש הרבה דברים שמריחים, ולא תמיד אפשר להגיע לרמה של אחריות פלילית לעבירה. כן. נכון, שאלה טובה. שאלה מצוינת. זו שאלה מצוינת, זה אחד הבקיעים שיש היום. היות ויש אפשרות לקנות באינטרנט, בעיקר במזרח הרחוק, אנחנו נתקלים לא פעם, בעיקר ממוצרי צריכה קטנים כמו פסמים ודברים מהסוג הזה, שמנסים לעקוף את הבלעדיות. אחד הדברים שבהסכם כזה צריך המפיץ לדרוש מהספק, זה למנוע את הדברים האלה. זה לוודא שאין מישהו מפיץ במדינה אחרת שעושה את הדברים האלה. בדרך כלל זה נעקף, לא תמיד. אני אגיד לכם, יש פעמים שגם הספק בחצי עין משתף פעולה, אבל באמת עלית על נקודה שהרבה פעמים אנחנו דורשים מספקים בהסכמים, כן, אתם אחראים שלא יהיה הספקה דרך האינטרנט של המוצרים האלה לארץ, לא תמיד קל, במיוחד שזה נעשה על ידי סיטונאי, מישהו שכבר קנה את הסחורה, לא תמיד קל לעקוף את זה. הנושא שאנחנו בודקים בתנאי המחר, אחד הדברים שאנחנו בודקים זה האם מדובר בעסקת רכישה או קונסיגנציה. ברור שלמפיץ יהיה עדיף שזאת תהיה עסקת קונסיגנציה, כי אז הסחורה בעצם נמצאת אצלו למשמרת והוא מוכר אותה, וכשהוא מוכר אותה הוא מעביר לספק את התשלום פחות העמלה. זה כמעט ולא קורה. ברוב המקרים, ממש ברוב המקרים, מה שאנחנו רואים זה הסכמי רכישה, הספק שולח את הסחורה והמפיץ מעביר את הכסף, וזאת בעצם העסקה. מכאן ואילך, המפיץ צריך למכור את זה לשוק, במחירים שלו, ברווח שלו, ולהתקדם. תנאי תרגום מדובר פה בתנאים בתנאים שהם דיברה עליהם מקודם דורין, זה תנאים קבועים וידועים לגבי אספקת מוצרים. התנאים האלה קובעים לא רק את האחריות, אלא גם את עלות המחיר. למשל, תנאים של X-Works אומרים, אתה לוקח את זה מהמפעל שלי, מכאן והלאה זה עליך. זה האחריות שלך, אתה אחראי. לעומת זאת, תנאים של סיף וכדומה אומרים, אנחנו נותנים לך מחיר שכולל עד ההגעה אליך. לכן, כשאתם מקבלים הצעה עם מחירים, עם תנאים, תבדקו טוב טוב באיזה תנאים מדובר, כי הפערים של ההובלה, של הביטוח וכולי, מדובר בפערים גדולים מאוד, וכמובן הנושא של הריסק, שעליו דיברה דורין, הריסק הוא גדול יותר. אני כבר חוויתי מקרים של לקוחות שקרה משהו בהובלה הימית, נגרמו נזקים, דברים שקורים הרבה, יש סערות, לא תמיד הקונטיינרים עמידים בפני הסערות האלה, ובסופו של דבר הסחורה מגיעה פגומה, ואז נשאלת השאלה מי אחראי לה. ברור שכשמדובר בהסכם מסוג של X-Works, אז הספק כבר לא אחראי, וזאת נהיית בעיה של המפיץ ושל חברת הביטוח שלו. שינויים במחירים, נושא מאוד כאוב. הספק תמיד ישאיר לעצמו את הזכות לשנות את המחירים. מה אפשר לעשות? אפשר לעשות כמה דברים. ראשית, אפשר לבקש מהספק בהסכם שייתן התראה. הוא לא יכול ביום אחד לשנות את המחירים, כי אני כבר במשא ומתן עם המשביר ועם סופר פארם ועם עוד כמה רשתות למכור להם את הסחורה, ואני לא יכול פתאום לשנות להם את המחירים בטווח הזה. ולכן אני צריך לקבל איזשהו נוטיס, 60 יום או משהו כזה מהספק, שיאפשר לי להתארגן בהסכמים שלי. דבר שני, וזה בדרך כלל הם מסכימים, אני צריך לבקש מהספק שעל הזמנות שכבר נעשו, אי אפשר יותר לשנות את המחיר. מה שכבר הוזמן, הוזמן. גם אם לא סופק. מה? מחיר יורד, לא כל כך נתקלתי בבעיות במקרים כאלה. למה? אם יש לך סטוק והמחיר ירד? מה? לא, התכוונתי שכשהספק משנה את המחיר למטה. לגבי הנושא של פגמים והחזרות של מוצרים, אנחנו נתקלים הרבה פעמים במצבים של סחורה, או שיש בעיה שהיא פגומה ויש ריקול, או נושאים אחרים. צריך להבטיח בהסכם שסחורה פגומה המפיץ יכול להחזיר לספק. ואפשר לקבוע איך, ואפשר לקבוע מנגנון, ומנגנון של זיכוי, זה מקובל ביחסים מסחריים, אין סיבה שהוא לא יסכים לזה, כמובן שהוא ידרוש אריזה מקורית, כמובן שהוא ידרוש שהפגם לא נגרם בגלל המפיץ, אבל אלו תנאים מאוד מאוד מקובלים. שירות ואחריות לטיב המוצר, גם כן, היות ואני כמפיץ, כשאני מספק פה בארץ, אני נדרש למי שאני לא מוכר לנושא של אחריות ושירות, צריך להסדיר את זה בהסכם. למשל, במוצרי אלקטרוניקה, אתם יודעים שיש היום חוקים די דרקוניים שמטילים על הספק בארץ, כן? שהוא בעצם המפיץ, כל מיני חובות לתקן, להחזיר בתוך תקופה מסוימת. אני חייב שיהיה לי back to back עם הספק שלי את אותה מערכת יחסים, כדי שלא יצא שאני קונה את הסחורה, אני לא יכול לקבל את התנאים שהקונים שלי מקבלים בחזרה מהספק שלי. כן. שוב, זה מה שאמרתי לגבי התנאים של המשלוח, זה תלוי במשא ומתן. אם המשא ומתן המסחרי כולל את המחיר, אבל איך המחיר בנוי? האם זה מחיר X-Works, האם זה מחיר free on board, FOB, סיף? מה? בהחזרה, מה שמקובל זה שהאחריות היא על הספק. כיוון שהוא שלח לי מוצר פגום, אין שום סיבה שלא, אני שילמתי הרי על ההובלה לארץ, הוא צריך לשלם את ההובלה חזרה. אחריות היצרן למוצרים והגבלת אחריות. זה דבר שחשוב מאוד לשים לב. חשוב מאוד לשים לב, כי כמו שדורין סיפרה על התביעות שיש בארצות הברית, הנושא הזה של תביעות ייצוגיות הולך ותופס כאן מקום הרבה יותר גדול, ואנחנו עדים כאן בארץ למצבים אגב, לפי החוק בארץ, גם המפיץ וגם הספק מחול הם אחראים. אם נגרם למישהו נזק גוף כתוצאה ממוצר פגום, שניהם אחראים. ואם מישהו רוצה לתבוע, הוא תובע את שניהם. ואז נוצר מצב שהמפיץ חייב למצוא דרך לחזור לספק, כיוון שמדובר בסחורה פגומה. ואם מדובר בסחורה פגומה, אני בסך הכל מה עשיתי? כי הבאתי את הסחורה הזאת, הבאתי אותה ומכרתי אותה. בסופו של דבר, מי שאחראי לזה צריך להיות הספק. זה נושא מאוד כאוב, זה נושא שיש עליו הרבה ויכוחים בהסכמים האלה. כדאי מאוד לעמוד על הנושא. יש ספקים שהם יותר הגונים, יש ספקים שהם פחות הגונים, אבל הנושא הזה מאוד חשוב, וכמובן מאוד מאוד חשוב שיהיה ביטוח. ביטוח של אחריות מוצרים זה ביטוח שקיים, וזה ביטוח שבהחלט, אתם יודעים שביטוח לא אומר שאנחנו מקבלים את הכסף, אבל הביטוח לפחות אומר שאם טובים אותנו, לפחות יש לנו את מי לתבוע.
סליחה, אתה יכול לתת איזה דוגמה לתביעה ייצוגית שהצליחה בישראל? שיקבל כסף והכל?
תראו, יש הרבה תביעות שהצליחו, אמנם זה לא נושא הרצאה, אבל אני אספר לכם מה שקורה בהרבה תביעות ייצוגיות, ועל זה בעצם כרגע אנחנו בתהליך של שינוי מדיניות. הרבה תביעות ייצוגיות נסגרות כביכול בהסכם פשרה, שכתוצאה מהסכם הפשרה הזה, התובע הייצוגי, הקבוצה שהוא מייצג, מקבלים איזשהם סכום, וכמובן שגם עורכי הדין, והדברים האלה לא מתפרסמים מי יודע מה, היות ושמים מודעה באיזשהו עיתון, והדברים האלה נעשים.
ומי המרוויחים?
המרוויחים הם בדרך כלל הקבוצה, אבל יותר מהם, מי שמרוויח זה התובע הייצוגי שיזם את זה ועורך הדין שלו. אני אשמח לדבר איתך אחרי הרצאה, זה לא בדיוק הנושא שלנו, תביעות ייצוגיות, אבל תביעות ייצוגיות היום יש יותר ויותר מגמה להקשות על התובעים הייצוגיים. שבוע שעבר היינו בדיון בתביעה ייצוגית בנושא של מוצר קוסמטיקה מסוים, שהשופטת אמרה לתובע הייצוגי, אני מאוד מאוד ממליצה לך למשוך את התביעה, כי זה יעלה לך ולעורך הדין שלך המון כסף. זו דוגמה של השינוי במגמה. השינוי במגמה הוא שהיום, בגלל שנעשתה הצפה כזאת של תביעות ייצוגיות, בא בית המשפט ואומר, עד כאן. כי מה שקורה זה תופעה כזאת. בית משפט נתבקש קודם כל לאשר את התביעה כייצוגית. אם הוא מסכים, אז התביעה מוגשת. אם הוא לא מסכים, מוגש ערעור. אם הערעור מתקבל, חוזרים חזרה. התביעה מוגשת. על כל שלב מוגש ערעור. הדברים האלה עולים המון כסף, מעסיקים את בתי המשפט. בתי המשפט הולכים ומתכנסים היום להחלטה שכדאי להגביל את הזכות הזאת לתביעה ייצוגית במקום שאין מקום להגיש אותה. סיום ההתקשרות. בכל הסכם הפצה בלעדית יש סיום התקשרות. שימו לב, אחד הסיבות לסיום התקשרות זה אם לא עמדתי ביעדים. אם הייתי אמור לקנות X בשנה ולא עמדתי, בהחלט לגיטימי שיבוא הספק ויגיד, אני רוצה לסיים את ההסכם, אני אמצא בשוק הישראלי מפיץ שהוא יותר טוב ממך, שהוא יצליח עם המותג שלי יותר טוב ממך, והוא ימכור יותר. אז זה מקרה שהוא די לגיטימי. אבל יש גם מקרים אחרים שהם שומרים לעצמם את הזכות בלי סיבה לבטל, וכאן זה בהחלט יהיה נכון לבוא ולנהל את המשא ומתן ולהגיד, רגע, אני עכשיו מקבל את ההפצה. תן לי איזה 2-3 לבנות את השוק, עד שבסך הכל אנשים יתרגלו למוצר, שידעו שהוא קיים, ידעו שהשירות הזה הוא דבר שהוא מתאים להם, ורק אז תתחיל בסנקציות. הייתי אומר שיש סיכויים גבוהים להצליח עם דרישה כזאת. סיום מוקדם עקב הפרה, כמו למשל מפיץ שמפר את ההתחייבות להתחרות, או לשמירה על הקניין הרוחני, או שנכנס לאיזשהו מצב של חדלות פירעון. כל הסיבות האלה הן סיבות שאנחנו נראה בהסכמים לסיום מוקדם. מה שחשוב לנו לשים לב, שכשיש סיום הסכם, שהספק ימשיך להיות אחראי לגבי הסחורה שלו שנמצאת כבר בחוץ. ודבר שני, צריך גם לדאוג שהספק לא ידרוש מאיתנו כל מיני פיצויים וכל מיני דרישות בגלל שסיימנו את ההסכם. בעיה רצינית מאוד היא הבעיה של המלאי, אותו מלאי שנשאר אצל המפיץ בתום התקופה. למה זאת בעיה? היא בעיה כפולה. אם הסחורה הזאת היא סחורה חמה ולוהטת, הספק ירצה שהמלאי הזה יירכש מיד כשאני מסיים את ההסכם, או על ידי המפיץ החדש, או על ידו, כיוון שהוא לא ירצה שאנחנו נעשה דמפינג. שאנחנו ניקח את הסחורה היוקרתית הזאת ונמכור אותה בסניפים של הסופרים הפחות יוקרתיים, ונגרום לירידה במעמד של הסחורה. זו אגב שיטת נקמה מאוד מאוד מוכרת של מפיצים שמחליטים לנקום בספק שהחליט לבטל את ההפצה שלהם. מצד שני, יש גם מקרים שהסחורה לא כל כך הולכת, ואז אני בתור מפיץ אנסה ללחוץ על הספק שיקנה את זה ממני, לפחות במחיר שאני קניתי ממנו. שוב, זה מסוג הנושאים ששווה לנהל עליהם משא ומתן בזמן שאנחנו חותמים על ההסכם, ולא כשאני כבר תקוע עם הסחורה. פתרון סכסוכים, גם על זה דורין דיברה באריכות. קשה לי להגיד לכם מה יכול להיות הפורום, המקום הכי נוח בשבילכם לנהל את המחלוקת המשפטית, אם תהיה לכם, מול הספק. אבל אני יכול להגיד לכם באופן כללי שני דברים. אחד, זה לא יהיה בארץ, כי רוב הספקים יושבים בחול, הם לא מוכנים לנהל את הסכסוכים המשפטיים שלהם בארץ. ושתיים, זה עלול להיות לכם יקר מאוד. ולכן, כדאי מאוד להסתכל טוב טוב על ההסכמים ולראות מה אומר הסעיף הזה, איזה סוג של בוררות, איפה היא תתנהל. בוררות, למשל בוררות ICC, אנחנו רואים את זה בהרבה הסכמים. יש כל מיני סוגים של ניסיונות של ICC מבחינתי. הייתה בוררות ICC שהייתי צד לה שהתנהלה שנים, והייתה בוררות שהייתה מהירה. זה ממש, הייתי אומר שאפילו אפשר להגיד שזה די אימור. זה די אימור, אבל כדאי להיות ער לזה, וכדאי להיות ער לזה שזה מאוד יקר, וכדאי להיות ער לזה שעדיף לא להיכנס לתוך סכסוך עם הספק שלך, וזה בהחלט יהיה, זה יהיה טוב לכל הצדדים.
אפשר להגדיר גישור?
גישור אפשר להגדיר, אבל שימו לב, גישור זה לא חובה, בוררות זה חובה. אם יש לי סעיף גישור, זה אומר אנחנו נעשה מאמצים, נלך לגישור, ננסה להסכים. אם יש לנו סעיף בוררות, זה אומר אין לנו ברירה, בתי המשפט סגורים בפנינו. אנחנו חייבים ללכת לאותו פורום של בוררות, באותה מדינה ששם כתוב בהסכם. ושימו לב, הרבה מפיצים ישראלים נכוו בזה. הם חשבו, הם יבואו ללונדון, ינהלו שם בוררות. הבוררות יכולה לעלות יותר מכל הסכסוך. אז יכול להיות ששווה באותו רגע לבוא ולהגיד, בוא נראה מה החוב, מה הסכסוך, ואולי כדאי לגמור אותו מאשר לנהל בוררות בלונדון. כן.
יכול לתת לנו איזשהו טיפ לגבי הנושא של הבוררות? מה בתור חברה ישראלית שעושה הסכם עם גורם מחו"ל, מה לכתוב בסעיף הזה שיצא לנו הכי זול אם יש באמת קרייסיס? כי תמיד אתה כותב איזה משהו באיזושהי מדינה, והעורכי דין שם יקרים בטירוף.
זה שוב בדיוק כמו שדורין אמרה לגבי ארצות הברית. תלוי באינדסטרי, בתעשייה, תלוי בהסכם. כל מקרה צריך לשבת ולחשוב לגופו מה הכי מתאים. מה הכי מתאים, כשהמגמה היא מראש להבין שמבחינתנו בארץ זה הכי טוב, אבל הסיכוי לשכנע אותו לבוא לארץ זה לא טוב. הדבר השני שהוא הכי טוב, זאת בוררות מסחרית, בוררות של ICC, ללא דין מהותי, ששם אנחנו יוצאים מנקודת הנחה שהבוררים המסחריים יסתכלו על העסקה כעסקה מסחרית, ויראו מי צודק בעסקה הזאת, ויפסקו, בוא נאמר, לפי הצדק.
אז אם אפשר שאומר, יש את הסדר, 1 ישראל, 2 ICC מסחרי, 3 ניו יורק או לונדון?
תלוי בעסקה, תלוי. אבל כשאתה מדבר על ניו יורק או לונדון, או אפילו מדינות אירופאיות אחרות, אתה מתחיל לדבר על סכומים מאוד מאוד גבוהים. היתרון בבוררות ICC, שהרבה פעמים, הבוררות עצמה יקרה, האגרה של ה-ICC היא יקרה, אבל לא תמיד אתה צריך ייצוג משפטי, ואז אתה יכול לחסוך קצת כסף בייצוג המשפטי, שזה גם כן אתה יכול לקחת בחשבון.
יש לך פתרון כרגע
לא להגיע, אבל בוא נאמר ככה, עדיף בוררות ובוררות מסחרית מאשר סעיף שיפוט עם בית משפט באיזושהי מדינה. זה סעיף בוררות עם בית משפט באיזושהי מדינה שאתה לא מכיר. כי זה יהיה לך הפתעה. אתה לא יודע מה הדין שם, אתה לא יודע מה הפרוצדורה שם. כן? אתה לא יודע מה עורכי הדין גובים שם, ולכן, אם יש לך ברירה, עדיף ללכת על בוררות מסחרית. כן. כן.
נכון שתהיה ישראלית, איזשהו אופשורית, או במדינת היעד, ששם מתבצעת ההפצה.
אתה מדבר על הסכמים בחו"ל? גם השאלה השנייה בחו"ל? גם השאלה השנייה. תראה, שוב, לגבי השאלה השנייה, אז אני יכול לענות לך רק על החלק הראשון, כי החלק השני, זה תלוי על איזה מדינה אנחנו מדברים. אבל כשאתה מסתכל על ספק שנמצא בארץ, אז כל מה שאמרתי לגבי המפיץ, תיקח את זה מהצד השני לגבי הספק. הספק צריך זכות אפשרות לביטול, הספק צריך כמה שיותר אפשרות לשמור על חופש פעולה עם המוצרים, אם הוא רוצה הוא יכול להוריד, להעביר מוצרים. הספק צריך לשמור על עצמו אפשרות למכור את המוצר בעצמו באותה מדינה. בוא נגיד בתור private label, שזה דרך שקורית הרבה פעמים שספק שומר לעצמו את האפשרות. הספק צריך לשמור על עצמו את האפשרות להעלות את המחיר. כל אותם דברים שאמרתי שהספק צריך לשמור על עצמו, קח את זה הפוך ותיתן את זה לספק. לגבי האם להיות ב-foreign entity, תראה, בארצות הברית, ושוב, דורין דיברה על זה, אם אתה מופיע שם בתור אופשור, אתה חשוד. אתה חשוד. אני יכול רק להגיד לך מהניסיון שלי בארצות הברית, אתה חייב להיות מקומי ומוכר, וכמה שיותר צבוע בצבעים אמריקאים. טוב, תודה רבה.
תודה רבה באמת למשה. אנחנו כרגיל, יש לנו תודות הקהל.
תודה רבה. תודה רבה לך.
תודה באמת. גם לדורין. Thank you very much.